Okay, so what I'm going to go do is go through and just kind of summarize all the stuff that we just talked about because it might be a little bit confusing or it might be just a little bit hard to remember. Okay, so sine or trig functions are written of this form. Y is equal to a sine of bx. Okay. Now we already took notes on this before, but the A, the letter out front, represents the amplitude. And that pretty much, that number out front tells you what the minimum and the maximum are going to be. It pretty much tells you how tall it goes and how low down it goes. Okay, so that's your amplitude, your minimum and your maximum. And this is the exact same thing for cosine as well. Y is equal to a cosine bx. Okay. The b, which is the number that's right next to the x, we call that the frequency. Okay, the frequency. So think about what frequency means in the English language. Frequency means like how many, like with what frequency do you go to the mall? Like how many times do you go to the mall in a week? Frequency is how many, or how many curves that you see between 0 and 2 pi. So frequency represents the number of curves, number of full curves you see between 0 and 2 pi. Or not even just between 0 and 2 pi. It's the number of curves that you see in 2 radians. In 2 pi radians. Okay, so that B tells us how many curves that you see in 2 pi radians. So between 0 and 2 pi, between 2 pi and 4 pi, 4 pi and 6 pi. Every 2 pi radians that you see, it's the number of curves that you see. So that's not ever going to change. In sine of x, there's only one curve. So you see one curve between 0 and 2 pi, one curve between 2 pi and 4 pi. In sine of 2x, you see two curves between 0 and 2 pi, two curves between 0 and 4 pi, and the pattern continues like that. So the frequency is the number of curves that you see in 2 pi radians. And then I think I told you that there was going to be one more vocab word that you needed to use, or needed to know, and that was period. So frequency and period are something that the kids were getting really confused and mixing them up back and forth. Period, we actually have an equation to figure out what the period is. And the period is not something that you can just look at the equation and figure out. Period is 2 pi divided by b. And b is what the frequency is. Okay, 2 pi divided by b. So frequency is the number of curves that you see in 2 pi radians. So it's the number of curves that you see between two sets of points. Period is the length. Period is the length of the interval needed to see one curve. One full curve. Okay, the length of the interval needed to see one full curve. So let's just think about this for 1 second. If I have a set of axes, and it's like this, and maybe between, maybe this is pi, maybe this is 2 pi. So the period is the length of the interval needed to see one full curve. So if I go up, and then I go down, and then I stop, that's one full sine curve, right? So what's the length of the interval needed to see one curve? That interval is 2 pi. What about if I do it like this? What about if I have up, down, that's one curve, up, down, that's another curve. What's the length of the interval needed to see one full curve? Well, I see one curve, up, down, stop, between 0 and pi. So what's the length of the interval needed to see one curve? It's pi. What about if all I see on my picture is this? Going up and then down, and that's all you see. And you don't even see one full curve. You're only seeing half of a curve. Well, if I'm looking for the period, how long is it going to take for me to see one curve? Well, obviously, this is only half of a curve. If I continued on in that direction, and it went down and then it went back up again, it would go back up at 4 pi. See how we see half of that curve between 0 and 2 pi? So the other half of the curve would be between 2 pi and 4 pi. So what's the period? What's the length of the interval needed to see just one curve? That's 4 pi. Okay? So that's why we use this equation, 2 pi over b, and that'll tell you really quickly what the period is without having to look at a graph, without having to think about it really hard. Okay, so let's do some example questions with this stuff. We are going to find the amplitude, frequency, and period. So find amplitude, frequency, and period. Of these example equations. So let's do y is equal to 3 sine 2x. Okay, so what's my amplitude? My amplitude is the number right out front. That tells me how tall and how low it goes, or how high and how low. So the amplitude in this case is 3. That means that that function starts at 0, ends at 0, goes through 0 in the middle. But when it hits its max, it's going all the way up to 3. When it hits its minimum, it's going all the way down to -3. Okay? What about the frequency? And the frequency we call b. It's that second number right here. The frequency is 2. So the frequency is how many curves do I see between 0 and 2 pi. And between 0 and 2 pi, I must see 2 full curves. And then the last thing is the period. And the period we figure out by doing 2 pi over b. So in this case, our b is 2, so 2 pi over 2, which is just pi. Remember, the period is how long does it take for me to see one curve, just one curve, and it takes apparently pi radians to see one curve. So let me just sketch this picture for you really quick, just so that you can see what I mean. I'm going to go out to 2 pi. I'm going to hit pi in the middle. Right here is pi over 2. And then right here is 3 pi over 2. Now, because my amplitude is 3, that means I'm not going up to 1, I'm actually going all the way up to 3 and down to -3. So let me show you what that would look like. Sine function. Okay, so we're looking at sine. Sine, if you go back to the notes that we took earlier, starts at 0, ends at 0, goes through 0 in the middle, actually. But because the length of the period is only pi, I am actually going to start at 0, end at 0 right here at pi. go through 0 in the middle. I'm going to reach my maximum of 3 in between those first two, minimum of 3 at those two. So that would be one full curve. Okay, so you see my amplitude is 3. My frequency is 2 because between 0 and 2 pi I'm going to see 2 full curves. And my period is pi because the interval it needed to take to see one curve is just pi. So let me do that again. The second curve is going to start at 0, end at 0, go through 0 in the middle. In between the first two zeros it's going to hit its max. In between the second two zeros it's going to hit its min. And you can see how this curve would just continue on and keep going. Okay, you see how we see 2 full curves. So these are kind of like homework questions that you're going to be asked to graph things. Okay, let's do another example. Let's do the graph y is equal to 1/2 cosine of 4x. That would be a really fun one to graph. So let's take a look. We want to know what the amplitude is. The amplitude is 1/2. The b, or the frequency, is 4, meaning I'm going to see 4 curves between 0 and 2 pi. And then my period is 2 pi over b, or in this case 2 pi over 4. So that is pi over 2, or 1/2 pi. So that means I'd see one full curve just right here. One full cosine curve. So I'm not even going to draw that